At 58 years old, I stopped functioning. Not dramatically, not all at once, just gradually. Over about 4 months, everything that had held me together stopped working. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't sleep properly, lost interest in things I had loved for decades, got through each day on momentum and habit, and told everyone I was fine. I was not fine. Carl Jung had a name for what was happening to me. He called it enantiodromia, the moment when a person has lived so long in one direction that the psyche forces a correction, a collapse that is not a breakdown, a dismantling that is, if you can survive it, the beginning of something more true. I didn't know that then. I know it now. I'm 64 years old, and I want to talk today about something that most people experience, but almost nobody discusses openly: emotional collapse. Not clinical depression necessarily, though sometimes it is that. Not a dramatic crisis, though sometimes it looks like one. Just the experience of reaching a point where the self you have been operating as for decades simply stops holding together. Where the roles, the habits, the identity you built through work and responsibility and showing up, all of it suddenly feels hollow, insufficient, like scaffolding around a building that was never actually constructed. Jung believed this experience, painful and disorienting as it is not a failure of the psyche. It is the psyche doing exactly what it is designed to do. He called it the invitation to individuation, the soul's insistence that you finally become yourself. Not the version of yourself built for other people's needs, but the one that was there before all of that, the one waiting to be found. Today, I want to walk you through how Jung understood emotional collapse, and more practically, what the path through it actually looks like. Not in theory, in specific, honest steps that I have lived and that I have watched others live. Stay with me through all of it, because the step that matters most, the one Jung considered the most essential, is not what most people expect, and it comes near the end. Before I get to step 2, I want to share something Jung wrote about collapse that I think is one of the most important reframings available to anyone going through this. It completely changed how I understood what was happening to me. I'll share it in about 4 minutes, but first, the first and most essential step that almost everyone gets wrong. The first step in rebuilding after emotional collapse is the one that feels most counterintuitive. Stop fighting it. Our instinct when we feel ourselves collapsing is to resist, to push through, to find the thing that will fix it quickly and get back to functioning, to treat the collapse as a problem to be solved rather than a message to be heard. Carl Jung understood this instinct, and he understood why it fails. Because emotional collapse is not a malfunction, it is a communication. The psyche has accumulated something: unprocessed grief, suppressed need, unlived life, until the weight of it finally exceeds the structure built to contain it. Fighting that process is like trying to hold a door closed against something that needs to come through. My friend Bernard went through his collapse at 62, lost his career in circumstances he didn't choose, spent 8 months trying to get back to who he had been before, applying for similar work, maintaining the same routines, refusing to let the collapse mean anything beyond a temporary setback. It wasn't a setback, it was a signal. And the 8 months he spent fighting it were 8 months of suffering he could have used differently. The first step is simply to stop, to put down the effort of resistance and ask, honestly, without immediately answering, what is this telling me? Second step, meet your shadow. Jung's concept of the shadow is central to understanding emotional collapse. The shadow is the collection of everything we have rejected, suppressed, or denied about ourselves.
qualities we deemed unacceptable and pushed below consciousness, where they continue to operate whether we acknowledge them or not. For many people over 60, the shadow contains decades of unexpressed feeling, anger that was never permitted, grief that was handled rather than felt, ambition that was sacrificed for responsibility, vulnerability that was sealed behind competence. Emotional collapse, Jung believed, is often the shadow breaking through, the parts of you that were never allowed to exist, demanding, finally, to be acknowledged. This is uncomfortable work. It requires sitting with things you have spent a lifetime avoiding. But it is also, Jung insisted, the only way through, because the parts of you that are driving the collapse are not going away. They're waiting to be integrated, to be brought into conscious relationship with the rest of who you are. Practically, this looks like asking yourself difficult questions and staying with the discomfort of not having easy answers. What have I never allowed myself to want? What have I been angry about for years without naming it? What grief am I still carrying that I told myself I had processed? Third step, and this is one Jung placed enormous importance on, find a symbolic language for what you're experiencing. Jung was a great believer in the power of images, dreams, and creative expression to access parts of the psyche that rational language cannot reach. He encouraged his patients to draw, to paint, to write not analytically but imaginatively, to give form to what was happening inside in ways that bypassed the controlling, rationalizing mind. I started writing during my collapse, not journaling in the sense of recording events, but writing images, metaphors, fragments, things that made no logical sense but felt true in some way I couldn't explain. It felt foolish at first. I'm not a writer, I'm not an artist, but something about the process of making the interior visible in some form outside myself began to shift things, slowly, not dramatically, but meaningfully. You don't have to write. Draw, garden with real attention, walk in nature and pay attention to what you notice. Cook something slowly. Whatever form of symbolic expression is available to you, use it. Jung believed it was not optional. It is how the unconscious communicates, and attending to it is how you begin to understand what the collapse is asking of you. Now, what Jung wrote about collapse that changed everything for me. He wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Read that again. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Not the collapse itself, not the loss, the grief, the disorientation, the acceptance, the full, undefended, honest acceptance of who you actually are, including the parts you spent decades hiding. That sentence reframed my entire experience because it told me that what I was resisting was not the collapse, it was myself, the version of myself that the collapse was trying to reveal. The next 3 steps are about how you move toward that acceptance, not all at once, not perfectly, but intentionally. Fourth step, grieve the identity you are losing and let it go. This is work that most people skip entirely. They want to get to the rebuilding without doing the grieving. But Jung was clear, you cannot build something new on ground that hasn't been cleared. And clearing the ground means genuinely mourning what is ending. For many people over 60, the collapse is connected to loss of identity, retirement that removed a professional self, illness that removed a physical self, loss that removed a relational self. The structure that held you together is gone. And before you can build something new, you have to actually feel that loss. Not manage it, feel it. My friend Patricia lost her career at 61 in circumstances she didn't choose. She was furious, which was appropriate, and then she was devastated, which was also appropriate. And she spent about 6 months cycling between the two before something shifted. She told me later, I had to actually grieve who I had been, like a real loss, with real mourning, before I could figure out who I was going to be next. That mourning is not weakness, it is the clearing of ground. Do it honestly, give it time. Don't rush toward the next chapter before you've properly closed the one that's ending. Fifth step, the one Jung considered most essential, the one that surprises people. Reconnect with what you loved before you became responsible for everything. Jung believed that the seeds of the second half of life were planted in the first half, in the things we loved before duty, obligation, and identity took over. The interests we abandoned because they weren't practical. The parts of ourselves we set aside because the world needed something more useful from us. He called this the return to the unlived life. And he believed it was not nostalgia, it was direction, a genuine compass pointing toward what the rebuilt self could actually be built from. I ask people going through collapse, what did you love at 12, at 15, at 20, before you became whoever the world needed you to be? Not what were you good at, what did you love? For me, the answer was unexpected. I loved being outside, loved building things with my hands, had spent 30 years sitting at desks and attending meetings and forgotten entirely that I was someone who needed to make things, who felt most himself when something tangible was taking shape under his hands. That reconnection, for me, through woodworking, was not a hobby, it was a reorientation, a thread back to a self that had been waiting for 30 years. Find your thread. It is there. It has been there the whole time. The collapse is, among other things, an invitation to pick it up again. Sixth step, build the new structure slowly and resist the pressure to rush. After collapse, there is enormous pressure, internal and external, to get back to functioning quickly, to have a plan, to show progress, to reassure yourself and everyone around you that you are recovering. Jung was skeptical of this pressure. He believed that the rebuilding after genuine collapse takes the time it takes, and that rushing it produces not a rebuilt self, but a patched version of the old one, a return to the same structure that collapsed, just reinforced just enough to hold for a few more years. Real rebuilding is slower. It happens in small decisions rather than grand plans, in the gradual accumulation of choices that align with who you are actually becoming rather than who you were. One morning ritual reclaimed, one relationship deepened, one creative practice begun, one old obligation released. These are not small things, they are the foundations. Build slowly, build honestly, build for the person you are becoming, not the person you were. Seventh and final step, find meaning in what happened, not despite the collapse, but through it. Jung believed that suffering without meaning is simply suffering, but suffering that is understood, that is given a place in the larger narrative of a life, becomes something else. Not comfortable, not easy to celebrate, but purposeful. The question is not, why did this happen to me? That question has no useful answer. The question is, what is this experience asking me to become? I am a different person than I was at 58. Not better in every way. Some things were genuinely lost, and I do not pretend otherwise. But more honest, more present, more clear about what matters and what does not. The collapse did that. Not gently, but completely. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is being who you are, not performing who you are, not managing who you are, being it fully, honestly, without the distance that fear creates. That privilege became available to me through collapse. I would not have chosen the path, but I am grateful for where it led. Here is your one action for today. Ask yourself one question and write the answer down before you close this video. The question is this: what did I love before I became responsible for everything? Not what were you good at. What did you love, genuinely, personally, for no reason other than that it was yours? Write whatever comes. Don't edit it, don't explain it, just write it. That answer is a thread, and following it, slowly, imperfectly, one small step at a time, is how the rebuilding begins. Before you go, I want to ask you something honest. Have you been through something that felt like collapse and come out the other side as someone different? Or are you in the middle of it right now, still trying to understand what it's asking of you? Leave it in the comments, because this is a conversation that deserves to be had openly, and I think more people are living it quietly than anyone realizes. Next time, I want to talk about Jung's concept of the second half of life more directly, what he believed it was actually for, and why the years after 60 might be the most psychologically significant of all. I'll see you then.